The Appalachian mother of the 1930s had one rule pinned above her stove. If it could be made at home, it did not get bought. In the coal camps of West Virginia, the hollers of eastern Kentucky, and the ridges above the Tennessee Cumberlands, families lived on scrip from the company store. A single sack of cornmeal had to stretch a full month. They built ash hoppers out of fireplace coals, soaked shelled corn in lye, and rinsed it through 3 cold water baths until it ran clear. Number 17 on this list turns a Bemis Brothers feed sack into a Sunday dress, a quilt back, and a flour bin liner before it hits the rag pile. Number 11 was the reason no jar in the root cellar ever sat empty past March. And number 3 on this list took the cracklings nobody wanted and built half a winter supper out of them. The paradox of these mountain kitchens is simple. The poorer the cabin got, the cleverer the cooking grew, and the longer one pig fed one family. So hit subscribe and stoke the wood stove with us, because here are 25 secret frugal tricks hillbilly families use to survive in America. Number 25. The 3-day pinto bean pot. In a Letcher County kitchen, a single pot of pintos was never one meal. It was 3, sometimes 4, depending on how the week broke. A mountain wife would set a heavy iron pot on the wood stove before sunrise on a Monday, drop in a ham bone she had saved from Sunday, and cover it with water from the spring branch. Day 1 was beans and cornbread, ladled hot with raw onion. Day 2, she stirred a cup of milk and a spoon of bacon grease into what was left, and it became soup beans for the lunch pails. Day 3, the last of it got mashed flat, fried in lard until the bottom crisped, and served as a pinto patty next to wild greens. The bone went to the dog after it had given up every bit of meat it had. 1 pot of beans, 1 bone, 3 days of supper, and a family of 7 fed for less than 15 cents. Number 24. Cornmeal stretched with hot water mush. When the meal bin was nearly empty and payday was still a week off, holler grandmothers reached for what they called water mush. 2 cups of cornmeal, 4 cups of boiling water, a small spoon of salt, and a tablespoon of grease was the whole recipe. It puffed up in the pot until it could feed a family of 6 off what would have made 1 bowl of grits. The morning portion was eaten hot with molasses. Whatever was left sat overnight in a tin pan and set hard. By breakfast, it sliced clean, hit a buttered skillet, and came out the color of buckwheat honey. 2 cups of meal, twice a day, 4 days running. That was how a sack of cornmeal stretched into a month. Number 23. Lye soap from the fireplace, ash hopper. The ash hopper mentioned at the top of this list was not a curiosity. It was a working appliance built from rough oak boards and set behind the smokehouse with a tin pan underneath. Every morning, the woman of the house carried the cold ashes from the cook stove out to the hopper, packed them down with the back of a broom, and poured a kettle of rainwater over the top. The water trickled through the hardwood ash, picked up the potassium hydroxide, and ran out the bottom into the pan as dark brown lye. When she had enough lye saved, she boiled it with rendered hog fat in a kettle over an outdoor fire, stirred it with a sassafras paddle until it traced, and poured the soft soap into wooden molds. 1 hog and 3 weeks of wood stove ash gave a family a year of laundry soap, dish soap, and floor scrub. Store-bought Octagon cost 8 cents a bar in 1934. Homemade cost nothing but the time it took to stir. Number 22. Hominy made with wood ash lye. The same hopper that made the soap also made the hominy. A coffee can of dry field corn went into a graniteware pot covered with 2 inches of weak lye drawn from the second pour through the ashes. It sat on the back of the stove all day, just barely simmering, until the yellow hulls slipped off the kernels and floated to the top. The cook poured off the lye water, rinsed the corn through 3 cold water baths in a granite basin until the rinse ran clear, and what was left was hominy, swollen white and tender as a boiled egg. Fried in bacon drippings, it became a side dish. Ground wet on a mill, it became masa for cornbread. The corn cost $1 a bushel. The lye was free. 1 hopper did the work of a Quaker Oats factory. Number 21. The pencil ledger of coal scrip. In the camps around Logan and Harlan, miners did not get paid in dollars. They got paid in scrip, little brass and aluminum tokens stamped with the company name, redeemable only at the company store. A wife who could read kept a pencil ledger in a Big Chief tablet on the kitchen shelf, and she wrote down every token that came in and every token that went out. Cornmeal, 20 cents. Lard, 15. Coal oil for the lamp, a dime. By the end of the month, she could tell at a glance whether the family was working out of debt or sinking deeper into it. The ledger was the only thing that kept a coal camp family from owing their soul, as the song went, to the company store. Some women hid the book in the flour bin. The store clerk never asked to see it, and the husband never argued with what it said. Number 20. Sock darning with a wooden egg. Every mountain household kept a smooth wooden egg in the mending basket, usually whittled out of poplar or dogwood by the man of the house on a winter evening by lamplight. The egg slipped inside a worn-through sock, held the heel taut, and gave the darning needle something firm to work against. A coal camp wife sitting by the wood stove after the children were asleep could pull a hole shut with leftover yarn from a sweater her oldest had outgrown, weaving the warp threads first and then the weft over and under until the patch looked almost like new knitting. One pair of heavy wool socks darned this way lasted 3 winters through ice, slush, and 12-hour shifts. A new pair from the company store cost 40 cents in 1936, almost a full shift of pay for a top loader. The math was simple. Mend the heel, save the shift, eat the difference in beans. The wooden egg paid for itself the very first time it touched a sock, and after that, it was pure profit. Number 19. The 3-cabin quilting bee swap. Up in the Cumberland Ridges, no one cabin had enough scrap fabric to make a whole quilt. So 3 or 4 households would pool their rag bags, meet in the cabin with the biggest front room, and quilt together through a long Saturday in February. One woman brought the worn-out shirt sleeves, another brought the feed sack scraps too small for a dress, a third brought the cotton batting she had carded from last year's pillow. The quilt that came off the frame at sundown was shared on a rotating system. This year it stayed on the host's bed. Next winter it moved to the 2nd cabin. The year after that, the 3rd. By the time the quilt came home, it was 4 years older, 3 babies older, and twice as warm from the body heat it had soaked up along the way. Number 18. The lard tin that lived 3 lives. An empty 4-pound armor lard tin was the most valuable empty container in the cabin. First, it was a pie plate, because the rim was the exact right depth for a deep dish apple pie made from dried limber twig slices soaked in well water. When the bottom finally rusted through from the oven, the tin became a tin cup for the spring branch, hammered flat at the seam and wired to a sapling stake near the water. When the cup developed a hole, the tin got its 3rd life as a tallow lantern. A cotton wick set in a puddle of rendered beef fat inside the bent-down tin would burn for 4 hours on the porch step, just bright enough to find the outhouse path on a moonless night. 1 tin, 2 cents new at the company store, and 3 years of service before it finally made the scrap pile. Number 17. Feed sack dresses from Bemis Brothers Cotton. This is the trick the intro promised. By 1933, Bemis Brothers down in Jackson, Tennessee, was printing its 100-pound flour and feed sacks with calico florals, blue gingham checks, and yellow rosebuds because the company knew exactly what mountain women would do with the cloth when the contents ran out. A holler wife who needed a Sunday dress for her oldest girl would tell her husband which sack to bring home. She would soak the printed cotton overnight in a vinegar bath to set the dye, rip out the chain-stitched seam, lay the flat rectangle on the kitchen table, and cut a dress in 3 pieces using a pattern traded from her sister-in-law. The same sack, after the dress was done, gave a quilt-back square and a flour bin liner for the pantry. By 1942, 3 million American women and children were wearing print feed bag clothes, and a good portion lived in cabins where a 40-cent dress at the Sears catalog was simply not on the table. Number 16. The salt pork crock in the root cellar. A 4-gallon stoneware crock with a wooden lid sat in the cool back corner of every Appalachian root cellar, and what lived inside it was a winter's worth of pork belly buried in rock salt. After hog killing in November, the holler grandmother would layer thick slabs of pork belly with coarse salt, 2 pounds of salt for every 10 pounds of meat, pressing each layer flat with a clean river stone. The crock stayed at 52 degrees underground all winter, dry and safe from spoilage. When a slab was needed for beans or greens, she would lift it out, rinse the salt off in a basin of cold spring water, and slice what she needed. One hog gave a family 90 days of fatback, 3 months of bean seasoning, and enough rendered lard to last through corn planting season. Before we keep counting, one quick thing while we are on the subject of cooking from scratch. If these mountain tricks are speaking to you, the Vintage Lifestyle Recipe Guide pulls 100 of these old hillbilly and Depression-era kitchen secrets into one clean booklet, with the ash hopper soap, the salt pork crock, the hot water mush, and the bean pot rotations all written out the way the grandmothers actually did them. The link is sitting in the description below. No rush, just there if you want it. Now back to the list. Number 15. Buttermilk saved from the wooden churn. After a holler, grandmother worked the dasher up and down in a tall wooden churn for 40 minutes on a Tuesday morning. Two things lifted up between the staves. The first was the butter, pressed into a carved wooden mold with a thistle or a sheaf of wheat on the bottom and set on the cool stone shelf of the springhouse. The second was the buttermilk, which most city families in 1932 would have dumped right down the drain. In the Cumberland cabins, that buttermilk was not a leftover. It was the second crop of the morning's work. It went into the cornbread batter that very night, into the biscuit dough the next morning before sunrise, into the cold drinking glasses passed around the porch on a hot July afternoon, and into the soaking bowl for any tough cut of squirrel or rabbit that needed tenderizing. 1 gallon of fresh skimmed cream became 1 pound of yellow butter and 3 quarts of tangy buttermilk, and not 1 tablespoon of any of it ever left the cabin without doing a second job. Number 14. The hillbilly wife who wasted nothing. In every coal camp from McDowell County to the Tug Fork, in every cabin tucked along Troublesome Creek, in every shotgun house at the head of a Cumberland holler, there was a woman whose name almost never made the church bulletin, but whose mind ran the whole household economy. She was the one who kept the pencil ledger in the Big Chief tablet, who set the bean pot on Monday and the soap kettle on Wednesday, who knew which Bemis Brothers sack would print up as a school dress and which one would only do for a flour bin liner. She had probably finished 6th grade. She had probably married at 17. She had probably borne 5 children by the time she was 28, buried at least one of them by the time she was 35, and lost a husband to the mine by the time she was 40. None of that stopped her from running a house on $12 of scrip a week. She rendered the lard, sliced the hominy, layered the salt pork, churned the butter, saved the buttermilk, mended the socks, swapped the quilts, set the dye in the feed sack cotton, hung the salt curing the bacon, kept the ash hopper packed, leached the lye, boiled the soap, traded the eggs at the company store for a tin of baking powder, and on Sunday morning she still got the family scrubbed and combed and out the door to the wood-frame Baptist church on the ridge in time for the 11 o'clock service. Frugal was not a virtue she chose. It was the only language her hands had ever spoken. And every trick on this list, every single one, came out of her kitchen first. Number 13. Sassafras tea and spring wild greens. By the middle of March, the root cellar was nearly empty. The potatoes had soft eyes and sprouted stems, the cabbage was down to a brown stump, and the salt pork crock was scraped down to its last gray slab. So the Appalachian mother sent the older children up the holler with a broken table fork, a paring knife, and an empty flour sack. They came back 2 hours later with pokeweed shoots, wild ramps, branch lettuce, creasy greens off the wet north slope, and a tangle of sassafras root pulled from the dirt bank above the spring. The greens went into a black kettle with the last scraps of fatback and a splash of vinegar. The sassafras root got scrubbed, split lengthwise, and dropped into a pot of boiling water to make a sweet red tea the old people called the spring tonic. Half the village drank a hot cup every morning for 2 solid weeks. It was the cheapest medicine in the hills and the only one that grew right outside the kitchen door. Number 12. Sorghum syrup boiled down from the cane patch. When the first hard frost browned the sorghum cane along the bottom of the garden, the whole holler showed up for the boil. The men cut the stalks with corn knives, stripped the leaves, and ran the cane through a horse-pulled mill that squeezed out a thin green juice the color of pond water. The juice ran into a long copper evaporator pan set over a wood fire behind the smokehouse, and the women of 3 cabins took turns skimming the foam off the top with a wooden paddle from sunup until well past dark. 10 gallons of green juice cooked down to 1 gallon of thick amber sorghum syrup, dark as walnut stain and sweet as anything a holler child ever tasted. That 1 gallon, sealed in stoneware jugs and set in the cool spring house, did the work of 40 pounds of store-bought sugar for a full year of biscuits, cornbread, and Sunday morning pancakes. Number 11. Mason jar canning by the 100 in the root cellar. The root cellar mentioned at the top of this list was the reason no jar ever sat empty past March, and the trick was simple discipline running from July all the way through October. A holler mother put up 300 mason jars in a normal summer canning season. Green beans went in first in a hot water bath, then tomatoes, then pickled corn, then apple butter cooked all day in a copper kettle over an outdoor fire, then sauerkraut crocked down in October. Every jar got a paper label with the month written in pencil. By Thanksgiving, the shelves along the back wall of the cellar held a full winter's pantry, 4 jars deep and 7 shelves high. The rule of the cellar was iron. You ate the oldest jar first, you washed it the same hour it came up the stairs, and you set it on the back porch upside down to dry for next summer's filling. Number 10. Hickory smoked hams hung in the smokehouse. Hickory smoke did the work refrigeration would not do for another 20 years up in the high mountains. After hog killing in November, the holler man hauled the 2 back hams, the shoulders, and the side bacon down to the smokehouse, a windowless little board shed set 50 feet from the cabin so the smell would not draw black bears off the ridge. He rubbed each ham with a cure of salt, brown sugar, and red pepper, hung the meat on iron hooks driven into the ceiling joists, and built a slow hickory fire on the dirt floor in a sheet metal pan. The smoke had to be cool, never hot, and the fire was kept smoldering for 6 full weeks with nothing but green hickory chunks added twice a day. By Christmas, the hams hung black on the outside, deep mahogany inside, and held their flavor on the smokehouse rafters through the entire next August. Number 9. Switchel Cool Drink for the Hayfield. By the second hour of corn hoeing under a Kentucky July sun, the men working the steep upper rows had sweated through their cotton work shirts twice. A holler wife back at the cabin would mix the hayfield drink the old people called switchel into a half-gallon stoneware jug. 2 tablespoons of sorghum syrup, 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar, a small spoon of fresh grated ginger, and cold spring water filled to the top. The girl of the house carried it up the hill in a tin pail with the jug nested in wet feed sack rags to keep it cool. Switchel was salt, sugar, and acid all at once. 3 things a body running off 6 biscuits and a slab of fatback needed by 10. A jug cost about 4 cents to put together. A bottle of pop at the company store cost a nickel and would have been gone in 2 swallows. Number 8. Wild ginseng dug for cash money. $40 a pound was what dry sang root paid at the Byers Barn in Hazard, Kentucky in 1934, which was more cash than a coal camp husband saw in a full month of double shifts underground. So every September, the older children of the holler took a hickory digging stick and a flour sack up the north slope hardwood ridges where the 4-pronged sang plant grew under the beech and the sugar maple. They dug the root careful, never the leaves, never the seeds, and rinsed each one in the spring branch. Dry weight was the trick. 10 pounds of fresh pulled sang dried down to 1 pound at the Byers scale. A good autumn of digging brought a family enough cash to pay the doctor bill, buy a pair of school shoes, and still tuck $2 away in the coffee tin behind the flour bin. Number 7. Braided rag rug from the last of everything. And nothing wore out faster in a holler cabin than a man's blue work shirt or a child's gingham school dress, which was exactly why the rag bag hung behind the kitchen door was never empty for long. When the bag finally got too heavy to lift, the holler grandmother tore every garment into long strips 1 inch wide, knotted the ends together into 3 running ribbons, and braided them tight on her lap while sitting by the fire after supper. The braid got coiled into a flat oval, and hand-stitched along the seam with carpet thread until it was big enough to fill the spot in front of the wood stove. One rag rug took 80 hours of evening work and 3 years' worth of worn-out clothing. It lasted 20 winters on the cabin floor and saved a child's bare feet from a January morning every single day. Number 6. Coal camp coffee boiled twice from the same grounds. That same company store charged 42 cents a pound for 8 o'clock coffee in 1935, which was more than most holler wives could justify spending on a single grocery trip. So she stretched the pound. The first pot of the morning got a heaping scoop of fresh ground beans dropped straight into boiling water on top of the wood stove and brewed strong for the men headed down to the mine. The wet grounds did not hit the slop bucket. She spread them flat on a tin plate, set the plate on the warming shelf above the firebox to dry through the day, and brewed them a second time the next morning with a small handful of fresh grounds folded in to lift the strength back up. 1 pound of beans brewed this way did the work of 2. Over a full year, that single trick saved a coal camp family nearly $8 in store credit. Number 5. Wild apples dried on the cabin roof. Across the cabin roof in late September, the Holler children laid out 1,000 thin slices of wild apple on clean cotton flour sacks, pinned down at the corners with smooth river stones. The sun did the work. The apples came from the old limber twig and black twig and Virginia beauty trees that grew half wild along the abandoned farmsteads up the Holler, fruit that nobody owned and nobody picked except the families that knew where the orchard stood. Each evening, the girl of the house climbed up the ladder and turned every slice with her bare hand before sundown so the dew would not soften them overnight. After 8 clear days, the slices were leathery, sweet, and dark as old saddle leather. She packed them into clean flour sacks tied tight at the neck and hung them from a rafter in the loft, where they kept good past March without a single jar, a single lid, or a single penny of store-bought sugar. Number 4. Sourdough starter passed cabin to cabin. Older than the cabin and twice as reliable, the Holler grandmothers used to say about the small clay crock of bubbling sourdough that sat on the warming shelf behind every kitchen stove from Letcher County clear up to the Cumberland Gap. Maybe a great-grandmother had carried it across the Blue Ridge in a covered wagon back in 1838. Maybe a neighbor woman had spooned a cup of it across the porch railing in 1902 when the new bride moved in down the road. Either way, the crock got fed a half cup of flour and a half cup of warm well water every morning before breakfast, and the starter rose up the side by dinner time. From that one crock came the morning biscuits, the Sunday loaf, the buckwheat pancakes, and the buttermilk cornbread baked in the side oven. No yeast packets, no store trip, no money out. One small crock fed 3 generations without missing a single rise. Number 3. Crackling cornbread from the Hog Day drippings. 200 pounds of November hog rendered down to lard gave a Holler family about 8 pounds of cracklings, those crisp brown bits of skin and fat that nobody at the table wanted on their own plate. The grandmother knew better. She took the cracklings nobody wanted and built half a winter's supper out of them by stirring 2 heaping cups into a Saturday night cornbread batter of stone-ground cornmeal, fresh buttermilk, soda, salt, and 1 beaten egg from the henhouse. The batter went into a hot, greased iron pan in a wood-fired oven and baked for 20 minutes until the top cracked open and the bottom set up nut brown. 1 9-inch round of crackling cornbread fed 7 people through a working winter night, broken into bowls of soup beans and washed down with fresh buttermilk from the springhouse. Number 2. Patching breeches with feed sack knee panels. What wore through first on a coal camp boy's overalls? Never the seat, never the cuff, never the bib. Always the knees, blown out by November from sliding down slate dumps after school and chasing escaped Dominicker hens back through the fence. So the Holler mother kept a clean stack of ironed Bemis Brothers feed sack rectangles in her sewing basket, each one cut to 8 by 10, ready for the next knee that gave out. When a hole showed through, she sat the boy on a stool, threaded a needle with strong button thread, and patched both knees in 20 minutes by the soft yellow light of the oil lamp. The patch always sat on the inside of the breeches, never the outside, so the boy never had to wear his poverty on his pant leg at school. One pair of overalls, patched this way, lasted from the oldest brother right down to the youngest, 3 boys deep. Number 1. The lamp left burning. In the cabin window, the kerosene lamp set on the front room window ledge of a holler cabin on a freezing January night meant one specific thing to every neighbor walking the ridge trail home from the mine that evening. It meant somebody inside that cabin was awake, was watching, and was ready to open the door if a man stumbled off the path in the dark. Coal camp families could not afford much, but they could afford the half cup of coal oil it took to keep one wick burning steady from sundown until the last shift came up the hollow at 2 in the morning. A lit window was the cheapest insurance policy on the mountain and the most reliable one. It cost about a penny a night. It saved frostbit fingers, broken legs, and at least one life every hard winter, and not one neighbor on that ridge ever asked who paid for the oil. Cast iron seasoning was sacred knowledge passed from mother to daughter, determining whether a woman could properly keep house and feed her family. Grandma's skillets had been seasoned for decades, their surfaces black and glossy from countless layers of lard rubbed in and baked on until naturally non-stick. New brides received cast iron as wedding gifts along with strict instructions. Never use soap, never let water sit, always wipe with grease after washing. The seasoning process was ritualistic. Coat the pan with lard, bake it upside down for hours, let it cool completely, repeat until the surface gleamed. A properly seasoned skillet could fry eggs that slid like they were on ice, could sear cornbread with a perfect crust, could last through generations of daily use. Some families had skillets tracing back to great-grandmothers, the accumulated seasoning containing decades of family meals. Losing that seasoning through careless cleaning was considered a tragedy. Fried catfish with hush puppies was a supper that tasted like the river itself. Fishermen brought home catfish from muddy banks, cleaning and breading them in cornmeal before frying them crisp in hot grease. The fillets sizzled golden, their flaky flesh tender beneath the crust. Alongside came hush puppies, little cornmeal balls fried in the same skillet, crunchy on the outside and soft inside. A few onion slices and a drizzle of vinegar finished the plate. This was food for Fridays, for family gatherings, for long days rewarded by full bellies. It carried the sound of crickets and the smell of the water, the feeling of summer nights on the porch. Fried catfish was not just a meal, it was a memory that tasted like laughter, hard work, and still water. In every bite, there was pride in what was caught, cooked, and shared without waste. It was country living at its most honest, simple, and complete. Forager's mushroom. Ragu transformed a handful of wild mushrooms into a meal that tasted of deep forest soil and clean rain. Hunters gathered chanterelles, morels, or other seasonal finds at first light, brushing off pine needles and slicing them into rustic pieces. In a heavy skillet, they melted bacon fat with garlic and wild onions until the fragrance filled the clearing, then tossed in the mushrooms to sear and release their earthy juices. A splash of spring water or a spoon of cream, if available, created a silky sauce that clung to each tender bite. Served over bread or with a side of roasted roots, the ragu delivered warmth and rich umami to those who spent their days in silence among towering trees. This dish celebrated knowledge of the land, for it required careful identification and respect for nature's offerings. Modern cooks may buy farmed mushrooms year-round, but they cannot capture the sense of discovery and quiet reward that came from gathering a meal straight from the shadowed floor of the wilderness. Chicken and slick dumplings were the mountain way of turning one bird into a feast that fed everyone around the table. A single chicken simmered down into a rich broth that filled the house with the smell of Sunday comfort. Thin dumplings rolled by hand-replaced fancy noodles, soaking up every drop of flavor and thickening the stew into a creamy, heartwarming dish. The bits of tender chicken floated among the slick dumplings like treasure pieces in gravy. This was not a meal of plenty, but one of patience, pride, and clever hands. Appalachian cooks knew how to stretch what they had until it felt like abundance. Steam rose from the pot like a promise that no one would go hungry tonight. Every bowl felt earned, heavy, and satisfying in the way only home cooking can be. The leftovers, if any, tasted richer by morning. Chicken and slick dumplings turned scarcity into celebration, hardship into comfort, and hunger into harmony. It was food for body and soul alike. Even today, that first spoonful carries the same truth. It does not take much to make a meal worth remembering when it is made with care and love. Stale bread transformation was an art form in mountain kitchens where throwing away food was considered sinful. Grandma never discarded hardened loaves or dried-out biscuits. Instead, she saw raw materials for entirely new dishes. Stale bread became bread pudding when combined with eggs, milk, sugar, and whatever spices were available, baked golden and served warm with cream. Dried biscuits were crushed into crumbs for coating fried foods or stretching meatloaf, adding texture while reducing expensive ground meat. Old cornbread was crumbled into buttermilk for quick breakfast or mixed with onions and sage for holiday dressing. Some grandmas dried bread completely, storing it in cloth bags for months. The practice extended to every baked good. Stale cake became trifle, old pie crust became soup crackers. Children grew up understanding that freshness was temporary, but usefulness was permanent, that every ingredient deserved multiple lives before finally feeding the chickens or pigs. Turnip soup with cracklins was a cold weather favorite that smelled like home the moment it started cooking. The turnips, peeled and diced, simmered alongside their greens in a pot of salty broth until tender. Then came the cracklins, crispy bits of pork rind saved from rendering lard, added for texture and flavor. The combination of smoky, crunchy pork and soft, peppery vegetables made every spoonful feel like a reward for the day's work. This soup did not pretend to be fancy, but it filled you up and warmed you through. It was the kind of dish that made neighbors linger at the table long after the bowls were empty. For families scraping by, turnip soup was proof that the simplest ingredients could still feel like a feast. The scent of it cooking on the stove told everyone that supper was near, and all was well. It was humble, hearty, and exactly what the hills were made of. Campfire Dutch oven. Peach cobbler turned rugged campsites into places of sweet reward after days of hard labor. Hunters or homesteaders opened precious cans of peaches saved from summer and poured them into a cast-iron pot, topping them with biscuit dough mixed on the spot. The lid was covered with glowing coals, and the cobbler baked slowly as night settled over the mountains. The scent of fruit and butter rose into the cool air, drawing every tired traveler toward the fire. When the lid lifted, golden crust revealed bubbling peach syrup that dripped onto tin plates. This dessert was more than a treat. It was proof that even in the wilds, a taste of comfort and celebration was possible. Children scraped the pot clean while adults savored the rare sweetness, knowing the peaches might be the only fruit for weeks. Modern camping desserts cannot match the simple magic of cobbler baked under stars with nothing but iron, fire, and patience to guide it. Rabbit and dumplings was a meal that tasted like effort and reward mixed together, the kind that carried the story of the hunt straight to the supper table. Catching the rabbit was only half the work. The rest was done slow and steady in the kitchen. The meat was browned, simmered in broth until tender, and dropped into bubbling stock where floury dumplings waited to soak up every drop of flavor. Steam fogged the windows while the smell drifted through the house, wrapping around everyone like a promise of comfort. It was gamey, rich, and deeply satisfying, an old-world supper that turned survival into celebration. Every bite reminded folks that food earned by hand carried a different kind of pride. Families would sit quiet except for the clink of spoons and soft hums of contentment. Rabbit and dumplings filled bellies and hearts alike, warming even the coldest nights. It was country comfort at its finest, built from grit, gratitude, and a little wild luck. In mountain homes, it stood as proof that patience and hard work always paid off. The meal may have been humble, but the feeling it brought was priceless. Home, warmth, and a kind of joy you could only taste. Stretching coffee with chicory root or roasted barley was how mountain families kept their morning ritual alive when real coffee was too expensive or unavailable at country stores. Grandma would dig chicory roots from roadsides, scrub them clean, slice them thin, and roast them slowly until dark brown and brittle. Ground fine and mixed with whatever coffee the family could afford, chicory-added body, and a slightly bitter earthiness that many people actually preferred. Some families roasted barley, rye, or dried corn kernels as coffee stretchers, creating blends so familiar children grew up thinking that was how coffee tasted. During the Depression and war years, these substitutes sometimes replaced coffee entirely, yet families gathered around kitchen tables just the same, warming hands on mugs filled with dark, steaming liquid. The practice taught that ritual and togetherness mattered more than expensive ingredients, and that resourcefulness preserved normalcy during hard times. Venison stew with root vegetables was the kind of meal that made a long winter seem shorter. Hunters would bring home venison from the woods, a prize that stretched through the week when cooked right. The meat was browned slow, then left to simmer for hours with onions, carrots, and potatoes until the broth turned rich and thick. The smell filled every corner of the cabin, carrying the promise of warmth and rest after a hard day's work. Venison had a deep flavor that no store-bought cut could match, wild and honest like the hills themselves. Every bite was hearty enough to chase off the chill of mountain nights. It was not just food, it was gratitude, a reminder that skill and patience could turn the wilderness into supper. Families gathered close around the table, steam rising from their bowls, and silence replaced talk as the first spoonfuls hit the tongue. This stew was more than survival. It was tradition simmered slow, memory served warm, and pride eaten clean to the last bite. Jerusalem artichoke stew transformed knobby foraged sunchokes into a hearty supper when gardens lay dormant. Gatherers dug the tubers from cold soil, scrubbing them clean before slicing them into rustic chunks. In a heavy pot, they joined smoked meat scraps, onions, and a splash of spring water, simmering until the roots softened and the broth thickened. The flavor was nutty and slightly sweet, richer than potatoes and perfectly suited to long simmering over a low fire. This stew warmed hunters returning from icy rivers and woodcutters chilled by wind, offering a subtle earthiness that celebrated the hidden gifts of the forest. Families often paired it with crusts of bannock or corn pone, soaking up every drop. Though Jerusalem artichokes grow freely today, few cooks remember how vital they once were to survival. This dish remains a quiet reminder that true abundance often waits beneath the surface, discovered only by those willing to dig deep into frozen ground for the nourishment hidden there. Apple scrap vinegar production turned kitchen waste into a valuable pantry staple that served dozens of purposes throughout the year. When Grandma peeled apples for pies or sauce, she saved every core and peeling in a crock covered with water and cloth. Over weeks, wild yeasts fermented the sugars into alcohol. Then bacteria transformed that alcohol into sharp, tangy vinegar. The process required patience, knowing when to stir, when to skim, when the vinegar was strong enough for use. The finished product preserved pickles, cleaned kitchen surfaces, dressed salads, and served as medicine for sore throats and digestive troubles. Some families kept mother of vinegar, the gelatinous culture that accelerated fermentation, passing it down through generations like sourdough starter. Making vinegar from scraps that would otherwise feed pigs demonstrated the mountain philosophy that nothing useful should ever be discarded. Every apple entering the kitchen gave twice, first as food, then as preservation tool. Homestead potato hash turned scraps and simple staples into a skillet full of comfort and sustenance. Settlers diced leftover smoked meat, onions, and hearty potatoes, frying everything together in hot cast iron until the edges crisped and the flavors blended into one savory bite. Early risers loved the way the scent of onions and sizzling pork filled the cold morning air, promising warmth and strength for long hours of labor. Sometimes wild herbs or a handful of garden peppers were tossed in for color and heat, but the beauty of this hash lay in its flexibility. It stretched scarce supplies, used every scrap, and satisfied appetites after hunting trips or timber work. Children often hovered near the stove, hoping for the crunchy bits at the bottom of the pan. Though modern diners may call it brunch fare, the original homestead version was a lifeline, a meal that proved how creativity and careful use of leftovers could turn the humblest ingredients into something worthy of a family gathering after a hard day. Wildberry buckle turned foraged fruit into a dessert that brightened even the roughest mountain camp. Gatherers filled baskets with blackberries, blueberries, or raspberries, their hands stained with juice and scratched by brambles. The berries were tossed with a little sugar and poured into a greased cast iron pan, then covered with a thick batter of flour, eggs if available, and a touch of cream or buttermilk. Baked beside a fire until the top browned and the fruit bubbled, the buckle offered a sweet reward for a day of hard labor. Its aroma lured tired hunters and children to the hearth, where they waited for the pan to cool just enough to slice. Each bite combined tart fruit with tender cake, a perfect blend of wild harvest and home comfort. In an era when refined desserts were rare, this humble dish felt like a celebration. Today, berry desserts are common, but few capture the sense of accomplishment that came from gathering each ingredient by hand and baking it in the quiet heart of the wilderness. Cornmeal mush with drippings was the ultimate proof that Appalachian cooks could turn yesterday's leftovers into today's comfort. First, you stirred cornmeal into salted water until it thickened into a firm porridge, poured it into pans, and let it cool overnight. The next morning, those firm slabs were sliced and fried in hot bacon grease until the edges crisped brown and the centers stayed creamy and soft. The smell alone was enough to pull folks from their beds, as rich and tempting as any feast. Poured over with white gravy or syrup, it became a breakfast fit for a hard day's work. Families who had little knew how to stretch every grain, every drop of grease, and every bit of effort. The crackle from the skillet told them they had done it right. Cornmeal mush with drippings was more than a meal. It was a quiet triumph. It fed the body and reminded the heart that nothing had gone to waste. Each bite tasted like patience, creativity, and pride, the kind only born from making do. What began as simple porridge became a golden slice of home that fed generations through thick and thin. Pot liquor was never discarded in a hillbilly kitchen because Grandma understood that the murky liquid left after boiling greens contained more nutrition than the vegetables themselves. When collards, turnip greens, or wild poke salad simmered for hours with a ham hock or fatback, the cooking water absorbed vitamins, minerals, and rich pork flavor. Rather than pouring this treasure down the drain, families saved pot liquor for drinking straight from cups, for soaking cornbread, or for soup and gravy bases. Elders believed it cured everything from winter colds to weak constitutions. The iron and vitamins helped prevent deficiencies common in communities with limited food variety. Children learned to love the salty taste, dunking cornbread until it softened into something between soup and porridge. Some families kept liquor warming on the stove for days, adding fresh water and vegetables as needed. This humble byproduct represented the mountain philosophy of waste nothing and nourish everyone. Poke salad greens were one of those dishes that demanded both courage and care. Pokeweed grew wild and fast, but it could turn dangerous if you did not boil it just right. Still, folks learned how to tame it. After boiling and rinsing it several times, they would fry it in bacon grease until tender and smoky. It became a side dish with real backbone, a plate full of green proof that mountain people could make a meal out of almost anything. Every bite carried a hint of the wild earth it came from. Eating poke salad was an act of both survival and defiance, a way to say, "We will eat well, even when the cupboard's empty." Served with cornbread or salt pork, it fed families through hard months when gardens were thin. In every community that made it, poke salad greens stood for resilience, bravery, and the genius of hungry folks who refused to go without. Venison stew with root vegetables was the essence of frontier survival, a slow-simmered meal that turned wild game into pure comfort. Hunters dressed the deer with practiced skill, saving every cut of meat for the long winter nights ahead. Thick pieces of venison browned in a cast-iron pot before joining chunks of potatoes, turnips, and carrots gathered from sparse gardens or traded from nearby homesteads. A splash of creek water and a handful of dried herbs created a broth that grew richer with every hour beside the fire. The stew cooked until the meat fell apart and the vegetables softened into a silky base that warmed chilled bones after a day in the cold. Families gathered with tin cups and rough bread, savoring each bite while the wind howled beyond the cabin walls. This simple dish brought hunters and children alike around the same pot, proving that careful effort and patience could turn a lean harvest into a feast. Today, few know the deep flavor of true venison cooked with such quiet attention. Sorghum molasses glazed biscuits were a sweet finish to long days that started before sunrise. Biscuits came out of the oven soft, golden, and steaming, ready for a brush of dark, sticky sorghum molasses. The syrup melted right into the crumb, leaving each bite sweet and rich without being heavy. Sorghum was a treasure of its own, grown, pressed, and boiled by hand in the fall, a slow process that turned cane into liquid gold. A jar of it on the table meant hard work had paid off. These biscuits were dessert, breakfast, and comfort all at once. You did not need butter or fancy toppings, just a drizzle of sorghum and a quiet moment. In the mountains, sweetness came from effort, not ease. Each biscuit carried that truth, warm as a hug from someone who loved you. Simple, sticky, and soul-deep. They ended the day the way mountain folks liked best, grateful, full, and smiling. Pressure canning summer vegetables was the difference between eating well through winter and going hungry when snow covered mountain gardens. Grandma spent late summer surrounded by mason jars, boiling kettles, and bushels of tomatoes, green beans, corn, and whatever else the garden produced. The pressure canner hissed on the wood stove while children helped wash vegetables and pack jars, learning skills they would carry into their own households. Each sealed jar represented security, food that would last through lean months when nothing fresh grew and money for store-bought goods didn't exist. Root cellars filled with rows of jewel-toned jars, ruby tomatoes, golden corn, emerald green beans, purple beets. The work was exhausting and hot, lasting from dawn until dark for weeks. But when January winds howled and snow drifted against cabin walls, families opened those jars and tasted summer. Every bite reminded them that hard work during plenty created comfort during scarcity. Possum and sweet potatoes was the kind of backwoods dinner that kept families fed through the leanest winters. When hunting was luck and store meat was too dear, possum became fair game, slow roasted in the hearth until tender and rich. Paired with syrupy baked sweet potatoes, the dish filled the kitchen with a deep, smoky aroma that wrapped around every soul inside. The meat's wild flavor was softened by the caramel sweetness of the potatoes, balancing the meal just right. No one cooked it for show. It was made from necessity and served with pride. In those hills, feeding your family meant using what the woods offered, without apology or waste. Preparing it took skill, patience, and courage, the kind born from survival, not luxury. Each bite carried the taste of the land, wild and honest as the people who cooked it. For visitors, it was daring. For locals, it was life. Possum and sweet potatoes told the story of mountain living, rough, resourceful, and full of heart. It was food that asked nothing fancy, only respect for what was given and gratitude for what it provided. Buffalo tongue stew was once considered a delicacy of the plains, offering rich texture and surprising tenderness that rewarded those willing to use every part of the animal. After a successful hunt, hunters cleaned the tongue carefully and simmered it for hours with onions, carrots, and a handful of wild herbs until the meat turned soft and silky. The broth thickened naturally, creating a savory base that clung to chunks of potato or cornbread dunked at the table. Around campfires or in frontier cabins, the stew became both celebration and sustenance, honoring the animal that provided so much. Children listened wide-eyed to stories of the chase while the fragrant steam carried through the crisp night air. This dish reflected a deep respect for nature's gifts and the understanding that waste was not an option. Today, buffalo herds have returned, but few cooks attempt the careful preparation of tongue, leaving this once-cherished meal largely forgotten except in the memories of those who knew its unique richness. Buttermilk tenderizing was a secret weapon passed between generations of country cooks who understood that tough cuts could become fork tender with patience. When families butchered older hens past their laying prime or worked with wild game from hunting trips, Grandma submerged the meat in buttermilk overnight, sometimes for 2 days. The natural acids broke down tough muscle fibers, while the fats kept meat moist during soaking. Rabbit, squirrel, venison, and old roosters all benefited from this treatment, emerging tender enough for frying or stewing. The buttermilk also pulled out gamey flavors that might make wild meat unpalatable to children. After soaking, meat was patted dry, dredged in seasoned flour, and fried crisp in bacon grease. Nothing was wasted. Leftover buttermilk went to the pigs or chickens. This trick cost almost nothing since buttermilk was a byproduct of churning butter, turning kitchen scraps into culinary magic. Hog maw and potatoes was one of those meals that proved nothing went to waste in a true hillbilly kitchen. The pig's stomach, cleaned and stuffed with diced potatoes, onions, and spices, was baked slow until the filling turned soft and savory. It was not a dish for the faint of heart, but for those who understood the value of every part of the animal, it was a delicacy. The skin crisped at the edges, sealing in the flavor of the simple stuffing inside. What others might have thrown away, mountain families turned into supper. The smell that filled the house was rich, earthy, and unforgettable. Plates were cleaned, not because of hunger alone, but out of respect for the effort behind it. Hog maw and potatoes taught a lesson about gratitude and grit. That waste was a luxury poor folks could never afford. It was born from necessity but perfected through pride. For those who grew up with it, no feast ever tasted quite as real. Beaver tail roast brought rich, savory fat to camps that relied on resourcefulness and respect for every animal taken. After a successful trapping day, hunters skinned the thick, paddle-shaped tail and cleaned it carefully before laying it over a bed of hot embers. As the outer layer blistered and crisped, the inner fat softened into a silky texture prized for both flavor and sustenance. The roasting scent mingled with wood smoke, signaling a feast that offered rare richness during long, cold nights. Slices of the tender interior were served plain or with a pinch of salt, each bite delivering warmth and calories that no lean cut of meat could match. Trappers often shared this delicacy as a sign of camaraderie and gratitude for a successful catch. Though modern diets rarely include such fare, those who tasted the smoky, buttery meat remembered it as an unmatched wilderness luxury, a dish that turned the hard work of the trap line into a celebratory meal that honored the animal and the skill of the hunter. Corn fritters with sorghum syrup were the kind of treat that made even the hardest days end on a sweet note. Fresh corn was grated right off the cob, mixed with egg and cornmeal, then dropped into hot grease until puffed and golden. Each fritter sizzled with that unmistakable sound of something good cooking. You could eat them plain with a pinch of salt, or drizzle them with dark, sticky sorghum syrup for a dessert that tasted like sunshine and soil. The syrup itself was a treasure, boiled down slow from cane juice, thick as honey and twice as rich. It was poured with care because every drop was earned through long days of turning the mill. Corn fritters were a fair reward for that labor, shared hot from the pan between laughter and stories. Their crisp edges and soft centers made them perfect for breakfast or supper alike. It was the kind of food that did not need a recipe, just memory and feeling, passed down from one careful cook to another. Simple, honest, and always satisfying. Maple sap molasses cake sweetened cold logging camps with the forest's own gift. Workers tapped maple trees at the first hint of spring, collecting clear sap in wooden buckets and boiling it down over roaring fires until it became a thick, dark syrup. Mixed with coarse flour, a bit of lard, and fresh eggs when they were available, the syrup transformed simple batter into a dense, fragrant cake that filled the cabin with a rich caramel aroma. Served warm with a drizzle of extra sap, the dessert lifted spirits after long days of cutting timber and hauling logs through snow. Children loved the sticky sweetness, while adults savored the deep maple flavor that no store-bought sugar could match. Baking this cake marked the transition from harsh winter to hopeful spring, a celebration of survival and the promise of new growth. Though refined sugar is common today, few desserts carry the same sense of season and place as a maple sap molasses cake baked in the glow of a wood fire. Wild greens and cornmeal dumplings were a springtime blessing after long winters of canned food and dried beans. Women and children took to the hills with baskets, picking pokeweed, dandelion, and mustard greens before they grew too bitter. Back home, the greens were boiled in salted water, then simmered in broth with dollops of soft cornmeal batter dropped right in. The dumplings puffed and thickened the pot, turning humble greens into a full meal. A bit of pork grease or smoked bone added the richness that money could not buy. This dish was as much about gathering as eating. It brought people together, walking the ridges and swapping stories. Each bite tasted like earth waking up again, a reminder that the hills still provided if you knew where to look. It was frugal food made with heart, filling bellies while keeping traditions alive. In every spoonful was the flavor of the land itself, wild, fresh, and honest. Saving bacon grease in a tin can by the stove was the cornerstone of hillbilly kitchen economy, a practice so essential that no mountain woman would dream of cooking without it. Every morning after frying salt-cured bacon, Grandma carefully poured the rendered fat through a strainer into a coffee can kept warm near the wood stove. That golden grease became liquid gold, used for frying eggs, seasoning skillets, flavoring beans, greasing biscuit pans, and enriching cornbread batter. The can sat there for years, constantly replenished, developing layers of smoky flavor that store-bought shortening could never match. Children learned early never to discard bacon drippings, understanding that waste was sinful in kitchens where money was scarce. The grease provided essential calories during lean winter months when fresh meat was impossible to find. This simple practice represented everything about mountain cooking: thrift, patience, and the knowledge that flavor compounds over time. Fried apples and biscuits made kitchens smell like home long before the word comfort food existed. Dried apples were soaked and stewed with butter, sugar, and a sprinkle of cinnamon until they turned glossy and golden in the pan. The mixture bubbled low and slow, thick enough to cling to a spoon but soft enough to melt on the tongue. When spooned over warm biscuits split straight from the oven, the syrup soaked down deep into the crumb. It was part breakfast, part dessert, and all memory. Families made it on cool mornings when the stove burned early, using whatever fruit they had dried the summer before. The smell filled every corner of the house, bringing even sleepy children to the table before the first call. For some, this dish was sweeter than candy. For others, it was a reminder of simpler days when love was measured in full plates and clean pans. Fried apples and biscuits proved that comfort did not come from riches, but from the warmth of what was already there. Every spoonful was proof that sweetness could come from scarcity, and joy could come from nothing more than a hot biscuit. Iron pot split. Pea soup with salted ham hock was the slow-simmered comfort that sustained hunters through the bitterest winter nights. Dried peas soaked in cool water overnight were poured into a heavy pot along with chunks of smoked ham hock and a scattering of onions and carrots. The mixture bubbled gently beside the hearth for hours, the peas breaking down into a creamy base while the pork released deep smoky flavor. The scent filled cabins and canvas tents alike, promising warmth and nourishment when snow drifted high against the walls. Served with coarse bread or a slice of bannock, each bowl offered steady energy for long days of trapping or chopping wood. Children slurped it eagerly, the rich broth clinging to their spoons and warming their hands. This soup required little more than time and patience, yet delivered both comfort and vital strength. Today, quick-dried mixes cannot match the depth of flavor earned by a night of slow cooking over glowing coals and the quiet satisfaction of a meal born from simple ingredients. Cornbread and milk supper was what families ate when the pantry was nearly bare. A leftover wedge of cornbread crumbled into a bowl, covered with cold milk or tangy buttermilk, became dinner without complaint. It was cool and soft, with just enough salt and sweetness to feel like comfort. Hill folk did not see this as poor eating. They saw it as good sense. Every crumb mattered. Every drop of milk earned its keep. On hot summer nights, this meal kept folks full without firing up the stove again. It carried the quiet rhythm of old kitchens, simple, clean, and made from what you had. Some would drizzle a little molasses over top or sprinkle sugar if they had extra. Kids slurped it down, while elders remembered the hard times that taught them gratitude. Cornbread and milk supper was proof that even in scarcity, there was dignity, taste, and the kind of peace that only home-cooked food could bring. Smoked venison. Jerky ensured that nothing from a successful hunt went to waste and that meat would last through the long frozen months. Lean deer strips were salted generously and hung above a low smoldering fire for hours, sometimes days, until the smoke kissed every fiber and the moisture vanished. The process demanded patience and constant tending to keep the temperature steady without open flames. The result was a dark, chewy strip packed with protein and smoky depth that could be eaten on the trail without any preparation. Hunters and trappers stored the jerky in cloth bags or metal tins, confident it would keep through weeks of travel. Children gnawed on pieces like candy, and adults often crumbled bits into stews for an extra layer of flavor. Even today, jerky remains popular, but few modern versions capture the true wilderness taste of venison, slowly dried over real wood smoke while wind rustled through the trees and snow crept along the ground outside the camp. These hillbilly tricks did not end with the woman who first stirred the soap pot or packed the ash hopper out behind the smokehouse. The wooden egg in the mending basket, the Bemis brothers' feed sack dress, the mason jars 300 deep along the cellar wall, the crackling stirred into Saturday's cornbread, and the lamp burning in the front window for a neighbor walking home in the dark. They were passed down hand to hand because nobody up that holler ever had the option of throwing anything or anybody away.